Hey everyone, welcome back to our latest explainer. Today we're taking on a civilization of just mind-boggling scale. I want you to picture an empire spanning over 3,000 years. That's 30 distinct dynasties. We're talking about ancient Egypt, which stands proudly as the most enduring civilization in world history. Just sit with that time span for a second. It's almost impossible, actually, scratch that, it is impossible, to fully wrap your head around the sheer longevity of this society. So this brings us to a really massive question. How in the world did a collection of small, scattered farming villages centered entirely around one single river transform into the world's very first true superpower? I mean, how did they develop such incredibly sophisticated theological concepts and pull off engineering feats that honestly still baffle us today? And just as importantly, what were those repeating cycles of chaos and order that completely defined this empire's incredible life? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it completely warps our sense of time. To understand the sheer scale of Egyptian history, get this. Cleopatra VII, the famous final pharaoh, she actually lived closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of the Great Pyramids. Let that sink in. The empire was literally ancient history to the ancient Egyptians themselves. It's just wild. Okay, let's dive into this and see how we're going to tackle 3,000 years of history. We'll start with the ribbon of life, move right into the age of the pyramids, explore the intense cycle of chaos and rebirth, witness the imperial new kingdom, and then wrap it all up with the fall of the pharaohs. Part 1. The ribbon of life, the foundation of an empire. To really understand the entire cycle of Egyptian order and chaos, you first have to understand the ground they built the whole shebang on, because geography fundamentally dictated their destiny. If you pull up a map of Africa, Egypt is essentially a long, green ribbon of life cutting straight through a vast, unforgiving desert. The logistics of the Nile's annual flooding, bringing that rich, fertile soil right to the riverbanks, well, that was the engine of their entire civilization. Without it, there is simply no Egypt. It was their absolute lifeline. Across this massive 3,000-year history, a very distinct pattern emerges. It all begins around 3100 BCE with unification, and then flows through three major eras of centralized power, the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. But notice how those are separated by intense periods of instability before finally concluding in 30 BCE with the Roman conquest. It's a constant repeating cycle of collapse and reinvention. This whole timeline basically kicks off because of one radical concept established right around that 3100 BCE mark. A legendary figure named Narmer, sometimes known as Menes, did the unthinkable. He managed to unite the warring tribes of Upper and Lower Egypt. And in doing so, he established the early dynastic period and this brand new theological concept, the pharaoh. Now, the pharaoh wasn't just a king. No, they were considered a living god. And that incredibly powerful unifying force is what held the country together for centuries. Part 2. Age of the Pyramids. The Old Kingdom. So this was the era where Egypt truly transformed into a centralized powerhouse. And that centralization allowed for undeniable historical wonders, like the Great Pyramid of Giza. We're talking about engineering brilliance on an unimaginable scale here, producing monuments of silent stones so massive that they can literally still be seen from space today. The organizational capacity required to pull something like this off, it's just staggering. But how was this massive pyramid building economy actually fueled? Well, we need to bust a pretty common myth right here. The pyramids were not built solely by slaves. Constructing them was actually a massive national project that required thousands of highly skilled laborers. However, it is also true that Egypt's economic fabric, like almost every ancient empire from Rome to China, was heavily woven with the systemic use of enslaved labor. Both elements were just standard parts of how the ancient world operated. Part 3. Chaos and Rebirth. The cycle continues. Let's move to and see how this builds, because the Old Kingdom's fracture triggered a terrifying domino effect of societal collapse during what's called the First Intermediate Period. Step 1, the climate shifts and the Nile just stops its predictable flooding. Step 2, without reliable food and resources, the centralized pharaonic government completely fails. And step 3, those power vacuums get filled by local warlords. Order completely dissolves into absolute chaos. Yet Egypt is nothing if not resilient. Out of those ashes rose the Middle Kingdom, proving that this was a civilization completely capable of learning from its collapse and adapting to survive. So instead of building massive, resource-draining tombs, the pharaohs shifted their focus directly to the land itself. They built these vast irrigation systems, essentially turning Egypt into the absolute breadbasket of the ancient world. And this newfound stability, it sparked a true golden age of literature and art. Part 4. The Imperial New Kingdom. The Cult of Personality. Following another era of intermediate chaos came the towering figures of the New Kingdom. If you know anything about ancient Egypt, honestly, this is the era you're probably picturing right now. We see heavy hitters like Hatshepsut, the remarkable woman who ruled as a king, Akhenaten, the quote-unquote heretic who radically tried to upend the state religion by forcing everyone to worship a single sun god, and, of course, Ramses the Great. These dynamic personalities absolutely drove the empire to its absolute peak. Under these leaders, Egypt entered its true imperial phase, and this brilliantly illustrates a major shift. They were no longer content just defending their borders. They actively conquered their neighbors, expanding the empire deep into the Middle East. This brought just unimaginable wealth pouring straight into the capital, creating this vibrant, breathing empire where it was literally said that gold was as common as dust.
Part 5. The Fall of the Pharaohs. The Late Period.
But, the sands of time eventually bury everything. The repeating cycle of chaos returned, but this time it was a permanent downward spiral. As the centuries rolled on, a mysterious confederation known as the Sea Peoples invaded, severely weakening the state. Simultaneously, internal corruption grew like a rot right from within, and eventually, the once unbreakable empire completely fractured. The aftermath was a pretty tragic carving up of the empire. During this late period, control of Egypt was swallowed whole by foreign powers. They fell under the control of the Persians, then the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and finally, the Romans. The absolute titans of the ancient world were now being ruled by outsiders. Which brings us to the famous, tragic end of the pharaohs. Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt, tried desperately to restore Egypt's glory. She played an incredibly high-stakes game of Roman politics, aligning herself with Julius Caesar and later on Mark Antony. But ultimately, despite her brilliance, she lost. So the crucial point is this. It all definitively ended in 30 BCE. With Cleopatra's defeat, the sun formally set on the pharaohs. After 3,000 years of golden masks, monumental pyramids, and just unparalleled resilience, ancient Egypt became just another province of the Roman Empire. After 3 millennia, the world's most enduring superpower just faded into the sands of time. And it really leaves us to wonder, if an empire that lasted 3,000 years can eventually fall to dust, what does that mean for the superpowers of our own modern world? The human story is vast, and there's always more to uncover. So, which civilization or era should we cover in our next entire history deep dive? Drop a comment below with your vote. We literally read them all and use your feedback to decide what we explain next. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and as always, keep learning.